I woke up disoriented in the hospital room, the beeping monitors a constant reminder of my brush with death. My son Frank stood nearby while my daughter-in-law Janet approached with a clipboard. The heart attack had left me weak, and the medication made everything fuzzy. Janet smiled sweetly, placing the clipboard on my lap. "It's just a health insurance form, Dad," she said soothingly. I signed where she pointed, my vision blurring. 2 weeks later, I returned home to find new locks. Janet opened the door, her smile gone. "You don't live here anymore," she announced coldly, waving papers bearing my signature. "What do you mean I don't live here anymore?" I asked, my overnight bag still clutched in my trembling hand. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the porch of the colonial-style home I'd purchased with my late wife Elaine 40 years ago. The very porch where we'd watched our children grow up, where we'd celebrated countless milestones. Janet stood in the doorway, blocking my entry. Her usually perfectly styled blonde hair was pulled back severely, matching her cold expression. "It means exactly what I said, Columbus," Janet replied, her voice emotionless. "This house now belongs to Frank and me. You signed over the deed at the hospital." "That's impossible," I stammered. "You said those were insurance papers." She disappeared inside momentarily, returning with an official-looking document. "It's all legal. See for yourself." My hands shook as I examined the paper. There it was, my signature on a deed transfer. The home I'd worked my entire career to pay off, now legally transferred to Janet and Frank. "Where is my son?" I demanded. "I need to speak with Frank immediately." "He's away on business, as usual," Janet replied with a shrug. "He knows about this. It was his idea, actually for estate planning purposes." I stood there, 65 years old, a retired engineering manager who'd survived a heart attack only to find myself essentially homeless. The property had appreciated significantly over the decades, worth easily $1.1 million in the current market. "You can't just throw me out on the street," I protested, feeling my heart beginning to race dangerously. "We've paid for a week at the Sunset Motel," Janet informed me, handing over a printed reservation and a small envelope. "There's some cash for food. We're not monsters, Columbus. This is just better for everyone." She closed the door before I could respond, the sound of the deadbolt sliding into place like a gunshot to my heart. The Sunset Motel was exactly what you'd expect. A roadside establishment with paper-thin walls and the lingering smell of cigarettes despite the no-smoking signs. I sat on the edge of the sagging mattress, still in shock, my single bag containing only what I'd taken to the hospital. The next morning, I called Frank repeatedly. When he finally answered, his voice was defensive from the start. "Dad, just calm down. This is a good solution for everyone. Janet says you've been forgetting things, leaving the stove on, the door unlocked. After your heart attack, we need to make sure you're taken care of." "That's not true," I argued. "I've never left the stove on. Your wife lied to me about what I was signing." "Why would she do that?" Frank shot back. "You're just confused. Janet says this happens with older people. We're looking into some nice assisted living facilities for you. Places with proper medical staff." The conversation ended with Frank promising to call me when he returned from his business trip. I sat in stunned silence after hanging up, unable to process how quickly my life had unraveled. I called my old friend George Turner the next day. We'd gone to law school together decades ago before I'd switched to engineering. George had stayed the course, becoming a respected elder law attorney in our community. "This is textbook elder abuse, Columbus," George said grimly after I'd explained the situation. "But I won't sugarcoat it, these cases can be difficult. The document appears properly executed. Your signature is valid, even if you were misled about what you were signing." "There has to be something we can do," I insisted. "There is," George assured me. "I'll help you fight this. But you need to understand what we're up against. Janet clearly planned this meticulously." I spent the next day in a daze, trying to piece together what I knew about my daughter-in-law. Janet had entered our lives 6 years ago, shortly after Frank's divorce. She'd always been charming around me, though something about her had never quite felt genuine. Late that evening, I received a call from Teresa, a former neighbor who still lived next door to my house. "Columbus, I just saw something concerning," she said urgently. "There's a for sale sign being installed in your front yard right now." I immediately logged onto real estate websites and found my home already listed at $800,000, far below market value, with a notation for cash buyers only, Quick close. My blood ran cold as I realized Janet wasn't just stealing my home, she was already working to convert it to cash and disappear. The following day I called Frank again, asking to meet for lunch. He agreed reluctantly, suggesting a diner halfway between my motel and our family home. I arrived early, rehearsing what I would say to make my son understand the gravity of the situation. Frank arrived 20 minutes late, and my heart sank when I saw Janet walking beside him. Her expression was a mask of concern as they slid into the booth across from me. "Dad," Frank began awkwardly, "I thought it would be good for Janet to join us. We're worried about you." I tried to maintain my composure. "Frank, I needed to speak with you alone." "Anything you want to say to Frank, you can say in front of me," Janet interjected, reaching across to pat my hand condescendingly. "We're family." The server brought coffee, and I waited until she walked away before speaking. "I know what you did, Janet. You tricked me into signing away my home while I was medicated, and now you've listed it for a quick sale below market value." Janet's expression didn't falter. "Columbus, this is exactly what we're concerned about. These paranoid accusations, the confusion." She turned to Frank. "Just like I told you." Frank looked uncomfortable but nodded. "Dad, Janet has been noticing things for months. The missed appointments, the bills you forgot to pay, finding your keys in the refrigerator." "None of that ever happened," I protested, my voice rising. "She's lying to you, Frank. Why can't you see that?" Janet leaned forward, her voice dropping to a theatrical whisper. "This is why we've decided to petition for guardianship, Columbus. For your own protection." The words hit me like another heart attack. "Guardianship? You're trying to have me declared incompetent?" Frank fidgeted with his napkin. "It's not like that, Dad. It's just, after your heart attack, we need to make sure you're taken care of properly." "Tell him the truth, Frank," I demanded. "Tell me why you really need my house." My son's face flushed, his eyes dropping to the table. Janet placed a hand on his arm, but he shook it off. "We're in debt, Dad," he finally admitted. "Bad investments, some credit card stuff. Janet's business venture didn't work out." "So you're stealing my house to fix your financial problems?" I asked incredulously. "We're not stealing anything," Janet snapped, her mask of concern slipping. "The house was going to be Frank's eventually anyway. We're just accelerating the timeline and making sure the money is properly managed." I turned to my son. "And you're okay with this? With putting your own father out on the street?" "You won't be on the street," Frank muttered. "Once the house sells, we'll set you up somewhere nice, somewhere with care." I realized with sickening clarity that my son had become completely manipulated by this woman. I stood up, leaving cash for my untouched coffee. "Frank, when you're ready to see what's really happening, you know how to reach me. Until then, I'll be fighting this with everything I have." Janet's eyes flashed with anger. "Be careful, Columbus. Fighting us will only make things harder for you." Back at the motel, I called my daughter Megan. She and I had a complicated relationship. She'd moved to Oregon years ago, after several arguments about money. Megan had started multiple businesses that failed, and she'd always blamed me for not providing enough financial support. Despite our differences, I hoped blood would prove thicker than water in this crisis. Megan arrived 2 days later, her presence a small comfort in the dingy motel room. She listened attentively as I explained everything that had happened. "I can't believe Janet would do this," Megan said, shaking her head. "And Frank is going along with it? That's awful, Dad." "I need your help, Megan," I admitted. "I'm fighting for my home, but I'm up against both of them." "Of course I'll help," she assured me. "Let me talk to them first, see if I can make them understand how wrong this is." Relief washed over me. Having Megan on my side gave me hope that perhaps this nightmare could be resolved within the family. Megan left, promising to return after speaking with Frank and Janet. Hours passed with no word. I called repeatedly, but my calls went straight to voicemail. Just as I was considering driving to the house myself, my phone rang. "Dad," Megan's voice sounded different. "I've spoken with Janet and Frank. And, did they listen?" "They did," she replied carefully. "And honestly, I think they might be right." My heart dropped. "What are you saying, Megan?" Janet showed me instances I hadn't known about. The missed appointments, the confusion. "Dad, you're not getting any younger, and after this heart attack." "Megan, none of that happened. Janet is making it all up. She had documentation, Dad. Calendar entries, notes from your doctor." "Forged," I insisted. Megan, please, you have to believe me. There was a long pause before Megan spoke again. Janet also mentioned something else. About how you refused to help me when my business was failing, but you had no problem paying for Frank's entire college education. And there it was, the real reason Megan had turned. The old resentment, expertly manipulated by Janet. So that's it? I asked. You're siding with them because of money? I'm siding with what makes sense, Megan replied coldly. Janet's offered me 10% from the house sale to help with their guardianship petition. At least she recognizes that I deserve something from this family. The betrayal was complete. Both my children had turned against me, manipulated by Janet's schemes and their own greed. After hanging up, I sat in the darkening motel room, feeling more alone than I had since Elaine passed away 3 years ago. The next day, legal papers arrived, formal notification of the guardianship hearing scheduled for the following month. According to the documents, both Frank and Megan were petitioning to have me declared incompetent, with Janet named as my guardian. I called George immediately, my hands shaking as I explained this new development. They're moving fast, George observed gravely. But this actually gives us an opportunity. Guardianship proceedings require medical evaluation. An independent doctor will assess you, not someone Janet has manipulated. It was a small hope, but I clung to it desperately as the walls closed in around me. My 7th day at the Sunset Motel marked the end of Janet's generous provision. With limited cash and no access to my accounts yet, I moved to an even cheaper weekly rate establishment called the Pinewood Lodge, a place that made the Sunset look like the Ritz-Carlton. The room was barely large enough for a bed and small table, with a shared bathroom down the hall. I sat on the edge of the mattress, counting the cash I had left, when my stomach reminded me I hadn't eaten since morning. There was a diner across the street that advertised a senior special. With few options, I headed there. I was halfway through a tasteless meatloaf when a voice interrupted my thoughts. Mr. Reynolds? Columbus Reynolds? I looked up to see a woman in her early 40s with curly brown hair, wearing scrubs under a light jacket. I'm sorry to bother you, she continued. I'm Abigail Winters. I was your nurse at County General during your stay in cardiac care. Recognition dawned slowly. Yes, of course. The night shift nurse. Abigail nodded. May I join you for a moment? I'm sorry to bother you, she continued. I'm Abigail Winters. I was your nurse at County General during your stay in cardiac care. I hope you don't think this is strange, she began, but I've been concerned since you left the hospital. Something didn't seem right about your discharge situation. My fork paused midway to my mouth. What do you mean? Abigail lowered her voice. Your daughter-in-law, I remember her. She came to have you sign papers while you were still heavily medicated. I walked in and she seemed rushed, nervous. When I asked if it could wait until you were more alert, she insisted it was urgent insurance documentation. My heart began to race. You saw this happen? I did, Abigail confirmed. It bothered me enough that I made a note in your chart. The timing and her behavior seemed inappropriate. For the first time since this ordeal began, I felt a glimmer of hope. Abigail, you have no idea what those papers really were or what's happened since. I explained everything: the deed transfer, being locked out of my home, the guardianship petition, both my children turning against me. Abigail listened intently, her expression growing increasingly troubled. This is elder abuse, she stated firmly when I finished. And I've seen it before, unfortunately. My brother is a detective with the county sheriff's office. He specializes in crimes against vulnerable adults. Would you be willing to speak with him? Absolutely, I replied without hesitation. Abigail made a call, and within an hour, Detective Paul Wilson arrived at the diner. He was a serious man, with prematurely gray hair and the weathered look of someone who had seen too much of human nature's darker side. He took detailed notes as I recounted my story again, asking occasional clarifying questions. Your nurse's observation places this firmly in criminal territory, Detective Wilson explained. Tricking someone into signing legal documents, especially when they're medicated in a hospital setting, constitutes fraud at minimum. Can you help me get my house back? I asked directly. This will require a two-pronged approach, he replied. Civil action to contest the deed transfer, which I understand you're pursuing with your attorney friend, and a criminal investigation, which is where I come in. These cases can be complicated and take time, Mr. Reynolds. Time is something I don't have much of, I admitted. Janet has already listed the house for sale, and I'm almost out of money. Detective Wilson exchanged a look with his sister. Abigail mentioned your situation. I have a possible temporary solution. Our brother Rob owns several apartment buildings. He might have something small available, maybe at a reduced rate, until we sort this out. I swallowed my pride. After decades of financial independence, accepting charity was difficult, but necessity overrode ego. The next day, I moved into a tiny studio apartment owned by Robert Wilson. The rent was nominal, just enough to keep everything legal, as Rob put it. Though basic, it was clean and private, a significant improvement over the Pinewood Lodge. George called that afternoon with an update. I filed a petition to contest the deed transfer on grounds of fraud and undue influence. We have a hearing date set for 3 weeks from now. In the meantime, I'm working on an emergency injunction to prevent the sale of the property. Janet's working fast, I told him. The house is already listed well below value for a quick sale. That actually helps our case, George assured me. It demonstrates suspicious behavior. Now, about this guardianship petition, I've arranged for an independent neuropsychological evaluation. The court will recognize those results over whatever Dr. Janet has lined up. With a more stable living situation and legal proceedings underway, I began to investigate Janet more thoroughly. Detective Wilson provided guidance on what information might be useful for both the civil and criminal cases. I started by contacting old friends, people I hadn't spoken with in months or even years. A disturbing pattern emerged. Many reported receiving calls from Janet expressing concerns about my memory and behavior. She had systematically alienated me from my social circle, planting seeds about cognitive decline. My friend Thomas, whom I'd known for 30 years, confessed, "She told us you were becoming combative when confronted about memory issues. Said it was common with dementia patients." We didn't know what to think, Columbus. One by one, I reconnected with these friends, explaining what had really happened. Most were horrified and immediately offered support. Their statements about Janet's systematic campaign to isolate me became part of Detective Wilson's growing file. The most shocking discovery came when I reached out to my late wife's sister, Linda. She and I had always been close, but Janet had told me last year that Linda didn't want contact anymore due to painful memories of Elaine. "That's absolute nonsense," Linda exclaimed when I called. "I've been trying to reach you for months. Janet always said you were too tired or not feeling well enough for visitors. She even claimed you asked her to screen your calls because it was becoming too stressful for you." Linda revealed something even more disturbing. About 6 months ago, Janet came to see me alone. She asked very detailed questions about your finances, your investments, if Elaine had any separate accounts you might not know about. It seemed odd, but she said she was helping you organize your affairs after your birthday health scare. "What health scare?" I asked, confused. "She said you had a minor stroke on your birthday." "That didn't happen?" Another lie, carefully crafted to gather information and isolate me. Janet had been planning this for far longer than I'd realized. As Detective Wilson and I dug deeper, we uncovered something truly alarming. Janet Williams wasn't her original name. Before marrying Frank, she had been Janet Blackwood in Arizona. A search of court records there revealed a pattern of financial exploitation cases involving elderly victims, though nothing that had resulted in criminal charges. "She's done this before," Detective Wilson confirmed grimly. "She finds vulnerable targets, usually older men with assets, and works her way into their lives. Then she systematically isolates them from support networks while building a case for incompetence." The picture becoming clearer only intensified my determination to fight back. This wasn't just about my home anymore, it was about stopping Janet before she could victimize anyone else. Late one evening, Abigail called with urgent news. "Columbus, one of my colleagues from the hospital just told me something important. Janet came by today asking for copies of your complete medical records. She specifically wanted documentation of any confusion or disorientation during your stay. Can she get those?" I asked, alarmed. "Not without your consent, but this shows she's building her case for the guardianship hearing. We need to make sure we have solid evidence of your competence." The next day brought another shock. When I attempted to withdraw money from my bank account, I was informed that I no longer had access. A durable power of attorney document had been filed, giving Janet control over my finances. The power of attorney was part of that hospital paperwork too, George confirmed after making inquiries. She slipped it in with the deed transfer. "This is good news and bad news, Columbus. It's another clear example of fraud. But it also means she now controls your assets. I felt the walls closing in again. Janet had stolen my home, turned my children against me, isolated me from friends, and now controlled my life savings. The guardianship hearing loomed, threatening to strip me of my last remaining freedom, my legal autonomy. That night, sitting in my sparse apartment, I reached the lowest point of despair. For a brief moment, I considered giving up. Maybe accepting a nice facility, as Frank had put it, would be easier than this fight. Then I thought of Elaine, how she had faced her cancer with unwavering courage. "We don't give up in this family," she used to say. With that memory strengthening my resolve, I called Detective Wilson with a new determination in my voice. "I want to set a trap," I told him, "and I need your help to do it." Detective Wilson's office was filled with the morning sun as he spread documents across his desk. 3 weeks had passed since our first meeting, and we'd made significant progress in building both the criminal and civil cases against Janet. "These bank records tell an interesting story," Paul said, pointing to highlighted transactions. "Janet has made systematic withdrawals from your accounts since gaining power of attorney. Small amounts, usually under $10,000, to avoid triggering automatic bank reports." George, who had joined us for this strategy session, nodded grimly. "Classic structured transactions. Banks are required to report cash transactions over $10,000 to federal authorities. She's clearly trying to stay under the radar." "Where's the money going?" I asked. "That's where it gets interesting," Paul replied, pulling out another document. "We've traced transfers to an account in Nevada under the name JB Enterprises. JB likely stands for Janet Blackwood, her name before she married your son." "So she's been planning this for years," I said, the realization settling heavily, taking the long approach to build credibility before making her move. "It appears so," George agreed, "but her haste in selling the house below market value may be her undoing. The court granted our emergency injunction yesterday. The sale cannot proceed until ownership is resolved." This small victory lifted my spirits. For 3 weeks, I'd been rebuilding my life piece by piece, reconnecting with friends, documenting evidence, and preparing for both the guardianship hearing and the civil case to reclaim my property. Abigail and her brothers had become invaluable allies. Beyond the affordable apartment, Robert had introduced me to several community resources for seniors facing financial exploitation. Abigail had provided a crucial statement about witnessing Janet's hospital manipulation, and Paul continued building the criminal case methodically. "We need to discuss strategy for the guardianship hearing," George said, changing the subject. "It's scheduled for next week, before our civil case hearing. If Janet succeeds in having you declared incompetent, our property case becomes much more complicated." "The neuropsychological evaluation showed you're completely competent," Paul reminded me. "Dr. Henderson found no evidence of cognitive decline beyond normal aging. His report will carry significant weight with the judge." "But Janet will have her own expert," I pointed out. "Yes, and that's why we need more," George agreed. "Have you had any contact with Frank since our last update?" I shook my head. My son had been avoiding my calls, though I'd left numerous messages asking to talk. The rift between us grew deeper with each passing day. "I have an idea," I said suddenly. "Frank travels constantly for work, but he'll be back for the guardianship hearing. What if I could get him to meet me, just the two of us? Record the conversation?" Paul shifted uncomfortably. "Recording conversations without consent can be legally problematic, depending on state laws." "Oregon is a one-party consent state," George countered. "As long as Columbus is part of the conversation, he can legally record it. But we'd need to be careful about how we use such a recording." The plan took shape quickly. I would invite Frank for coffee, ostensibly to discuss an amicable resolution before the hearing. In reality, I would be wearing a recording device provided by Paul, attempting to get Frank to admit that Janet had manipulated him and that he knew I was fully competent. 2 days later, to my surprise, Frank agreed to meet. We arranged to meet at a quiet cafe far from both our homes. Frank looked tired when he arrived, with dark circles under his eyes and a nervousness I hadn't seen in him since he was a teenager preparing for college interviews. "Thanks for coming," I began, the small recording device feeling heavy in my pocket. Frank nodded tensely. "Janet doesn't know I'm here. She wouldn't approve." This caught me off guard. "You had to hide this meeting from your wife?" He fidgeted with his coffee cup. "Things have been intense lately. She's very focused on the guardianship hearing." I decided to approach the subject carefully. Frank, before we get into anything else, I need to know, do you truly believe I'm incompetent, that I can't manage my own affairs? Frank wouldn't meet my eyes. Dad, it's complicated. Janet has shown me evidence. What evidence exactly? I pressed. Frank looked tired when he arrived, with dark circles under his eyes and a nervousness I hadn't seen in him since he was a teenager preparing for college interviews. What evidence exactly? I pressed. 2 days later, to my surprise, Frank agreed to meet. We arranged to meet at a quiet cafe far from both our homes. I leaned forward. None of that happened, Frank. I've never wandered anywhere in my bathrobe. I've contacted my doctor. There are no notes about memory concerns in my file. Janet fabricated all of it. For the money, I said plainly. She tricked me into signing over the house while I was medicated in the hospital. Did she tell you that part? Or did she just say I willingly signed estate planning documents? Think about it, son. Would I voluntarily sign away my home, then move into a motel? Does that make any sense? Frank ran a hand through his hair. She said you got confused afterward, that you forgot the conversation we all supposedly had about the transfer. There was no conversation, I insisted. I never agreed to any transfer. Janet came to my hospital room when I was heavily sedated and told me I was signing insurance documents. I have a witness. My night nurse saw it happen and documented her concerns. Frank's composure began to crack. I don't know what to believe anymore. Janet's been acting strange since all this started, secretive. She's made large withdrawals from our joint account. When I ask questions, she gets defensive. This was the opening I needed. Frank, I believe Janet is conning both of us. I've discovered she's done this before, under her previous name, Janet Blackwood. Previous name? What are you talking about? She was Janet Blackwood in Arizona before she met you. There were multiple complaints of elder financial exploitation, though no formal charges. She's taking money from my accounts using a fraudulent power of attorney and transferring it to an account in Nevada. Frank looked stunned. That's a serious accusation, Dad. It's not an accusation, it's a documented fact. The detective investigating the case has the paper trail. Janet is systematically emptying my accounts while trying to sell the house below market value for a quick cash payout. I knew about the house sale, Frank admitted, his voice dropping. She said it made sense to downsize, that the money would pay for your care facility. But I had no idea about any fraudulent documents or mysterious accounts. I took a deep breath. Frank, I need you to be honest with me. Did you know she was planning to take my house before it happened? After a long pause, Frank sighed heavily. She mentioned adding your house to our estate planning. For protection, she said. But nothing about you not living there anymore. When you ended up in the motel, she told me it was temporary while the house was being prepared for sale, that you had agreed to all of it. And you believed her, without confirming with me? We've been having financial troubles, Frank confessed. Janet's spending has been excessive. We've maxed out credit cards, taken second mortgages on our own home. She kept saying your house was the solution, that once it's sold, all our problems would be fixed. So you looked the other way, I concluded, the hurt evident in my voice. I didn't want to believe she was capable of what you're describing, Frank said, his eyes finally meeting mine. But things haven't added up lately. The way she rushed the house listing, her insistence on cash buyers only, her obsession with the guardianship hearing. I decided to take a risk. Frank, I need to ask you something important. Are you and Janet legally married? His brow furrowed. What kind of question is that? Of course we are. When and where did you get married? Did you see the marriage certificate? It was a small ceremony in Sedona, just us and a justice of the peace. Janet handled all the paperwork. A shadow of doubt crossed his face. Why are you asking this? Because I believe Janet may still be legally married to someone else. Someone in Arizona. Frank's face drained of color. That's impossible. Is it? Have you ever met any of her family? Do you know anything about her life before she met you? Frank sat in stunned silence, clearly processing this new possibility. Finally, he spoke. I want to see this evidence you're talking about. All of it. Come with me to Detective Wilson's office. He can show you everything we've uncovered. 4 hours later, Frank sat in stunned silence in Paul's office. Having reviewed bank records, court documents from Arizona, and preliminary findings from the fraud investigation. I can't believe I was so blind, he whispered, his voice breaking. She's been playing me from the beginning. Not just you, I reminded him gently. She's manipulated everyone around her, Megan, our friends, even medical professionals. Frank looked up, his eyes red. What do we do now? First, you withdraw your support for the guardianship petition, George advised. Without both children backing Janet's claim, her case is significantly weakened. Frank nodded. Consider it done. What else? We need to locate all the assets Janet has control over, Paul explained. Your joint accounts, Columbus's accounts, she accessed through the power of attorney, any property she might have transferred. As we discussed next steps, Frank's phone buzzed repeatedly with incoming calls from Janet. He ignored them at first, then finally answered on speakerphone. Where are you? Janet demanded, her voice sharp. I've been calling for hours. Just taking care of some business, Frank replied vaguely. What business? You're supposed to be helping me prepare for the hearing. Actually, I've been thinking about that, Frank said carefully. I'm not sure proceeding with the guardianship is the right thing to do. The line went silent for a moment. What's that supposed to mean? Janet finally asked, her tone dangerous. It means I've been talking to my father, and I'm not convinced he's incompetent. You spoke to Columbus? Without me? After everything I told you about his manipulation? He's my father, Janet. I'm allowed to speak with him. Where are you right now? She demanded. Are you with him? That's not important. What's important is that I'm withdrawing my support for the guardianship petition. Janet's response chilled us all. You have no idea what you're doing, Frank. If you back out now, everything falls apart. Is that what you want? To lose everything we've worked for? What exactly have we worked for, Janet? Or should I call you Janet Blackwood? The silence that followed was deafening. When Janet finally spoke, her voice had transformed colder, harder. Who have you been talking to? What lies has your father been spreading? They're not lies if they're documented in court records, Frank replied. Did you think no one would ever look into your background? Or notice the money disappearing into accounts in Nevada? You're making a serious mistake, Janet hissed. I've protected you, Frank. I've handled everything while you've been off on your precious business trips. Without me, you have nothing. I'd rather have nothing than be part of stealing from my own father, Frank replied firmly before ending the call. He looked up at me, determination replacing the uncertainty in his eyes. I'm so sorry, Dad. I'll make this right. As we left the detective's office that evening, I felt a glimmer of hope. With Frank now on my side, the guardianship threat was significantly reduced. But Janet still controlled my finances and technically owned my home. And judging by her reaction on the phone, she wasn't going to surrender without a fight. What none of us realized then was that Janet had been preparing for this contingency all along, and her next move would leave us all reeling. The morning after Frank's revelations, I awoke to an urgent call from George. Columbus, check your bank accounts immediately, he instructed, his voice tense. All of them. I pulled up my banking app on my phone, something I rarely used before this ordeal. My checking account balance read 0, my savings account the same. Even my retirement account showed no available funds. She's cleaned me out, I said numbly. Everything's gone. I was afraid of that, George replied grimly. After Frank confronted her, she must have realized her time was running out. We need to notify the banks and freeze any further transactions immediately. By noon, we'd contacted all my financial institutions. The news was uniformly devastating. Janet had initiated transfers from every account over the past 24 hours, emptying them completely. The power of attorney document she'd tricked me into signing had given her full access. Where did the money go? I asked Detective Wilson when we met at the police station later that day. We're tracking the transfers now, he replied. Preliminary findings show multiple accounts across 3 states. She's trying to complicate the trail. Frank joined us, looking haggard. She didn't come home last night, packed some bags and disappeared. I've been calling everyone I know who might have information about her whereabouts. What about the house? I asked. Has she been back there? Not that I know of. I drove by this morning, no sign of activity. The court injunction prevents her from selling it, George reminded us. But that doesn't mean she won't try something else. Like what? Frank asked. Given her pattern, she might attempt to take out loans against the property, or find some other way to extract value from it, George explained. We should place our own security measures on the house. Detective Wilson agreed to have patrol cars make regular passes by the property. Frank volunteered to stay there temporarily to ensure Janet didn't return unnoticed. We need to accelerate our legal proceedings, George advised. With Janet on the run, we have a stronger case for emergency relief. I'll file motions to expedite both the deed challenge and to revoke her power of attorney." While the legal machinery ground forward, I focused on a more immediate concern: basic survival. With my accounts emptied and no access to my retirement funds, I was essentially penniless. Robert Wilson generously extended my reduced rent arrangement, and Abigail helped me apply for emergency assistance programs for seniors. The humiliation of applying for food stamps at 65, after a successful career and decades of financial stability, was nearly unbearable. But Abigail's gentle encouragement helped me push through my pride. "This is temporary," she reminded me, "and there's no shame in accepting help when you've been victimized." 2 days later, Frank called with alarming news. "Dad, someone's been in the house. Nothing obvious is missing, but drawers have been opened, papers moved around. I think Janet came back for something specific." "What would she be looking for?" I wondered aloud. The answer came that afternoon. George received notice that Janet had filed additional documents with the court, including what she claimed was a psychiatric evaluation, concluding I suffered from dementia. "This is preposterous," George fumed. "We have a genuine neuropsychological evaluation showing you're completely competent. This alleged psychiatric report is almost certainly fraudulent." "She must have been looking for medical records to falsify," Detective Wilson suggested. "Did you keep health information at the house?" "In my home office," I confirmed. I had a file cabinet with medical documents, including my visits to Dr. Harper over the years. "That's probably what she was after," Frank agreed. "Raw material to fabricate evidence for the guardianship case." Despite Janet's disappearance, the guardianship hearing proceeded as scheduled. Megan appeared, still supporting Janet's petition, but without Janet herself present, and with Frank now testifying to my competence, the judge was skeptical. "The court finds insufficient evidence to support the petition for guardianship," he concluded after reviewing both the competing medical reports and hearing testimony. "Furthermore, given the concerning allegations of document fraud and financial exploitation, I'm referring this matter to Adult Protective Services for further investigation." One battle won, but the war continued. Janet remained missing, along with nearly all my liquid assets. My home was still legally in her name, and the civil case to recover it was moving slowly through the system. Then came an unexpected breakthrough. Linda, my late wife's sister, called with crucial information. "Columbus, I just remembered something important. About 6 months ago, when Janet came asking about your finances, she also asked very specific questions about the house. She wanted to know if you had another copy of the deed somewhere, or if Elaine might have kept one in a safe deposit box." "Why would she care about that?" I asked, puzzled. "I didn't think much of it at the time, but now it seems significant. She specifically wanted to know if the house was just in your name, or if Elaine was on the deed too." This triggered a memory. Elaine and I purchased the house together, as joint tenants with right of survivorship. When she passed, the property automatically transferred fully to me. I filed the paperwork with the county recorder. "Or did you?" George asked when I shared this information. "Let's double-check the official records." A search of county property records revealed something astonishing. While Elaine and I had indeed purchased the house as joint tenants, the survivorship paperwork following her death appeared incomplete. There was a form that had been filled out but never officially recorded with the county. "This could be our breakthrough," George explained excitedly. "If the survivorship transfer wasn't properly completed, then technically, Elaine's half of the property remained in her estate. Janet couldn't have tricked you into signing over something you didn't fully own." "Or did you?" George asked when I shared this information. "Let's double-check the official records." "But Elaine's will left everything to me," I pointed out. "Exactly," George agreed. "Which means we can challenge Janet's deed on multiple fronts: fraudulent procurement, and the fact that you couldn't legally transfer the entire property since you didn't officially own Elaine's portion yet." Meanwhile, Detective Wilson's financial investigation continued to uncover Janet's elaborate schemes. Bank records showed a pattern of similar activities dating back years before she met Frank: small-scale financial exploitation of older individuals, always staying just below the threshold that might trigger serious criminal investigation. "She's a professional con artist," Paul explained. "She finds targets, builds trust over time, then executes her scheme. The difference this time is that she got greedy going after $1 million property, rather than her usual smaller scores." As we built both the civil and criminal cases, Frank worked tirelessly to make amends. He contacted Megan, sharing the evidence we'd uncovered about Janet's past and her current activities. Initially skeptical, Megan finally agreed to review the documentation. "I can't believe I fell for her manipulation," Megan admitted when she called me afterward. "She played on my old resentments perfectly. I'm so sorry, Dad." The reconciliation with both my children brought emotional healing, even as the practical problems remained daunting. With my finances decimated, I was living day to day, dependent on assistance and the goodwill of new friends. Then, just as we thought Janet had disappeared permanently with my money, Detective Wilson received an alert. "The house just went into escrow," he reported urgently. "Despite the court injunction, Janet has somehow found a buyer willing to proceed with the sale." "How is that possible?" I demanded. "The title company should have seen the court order." "She's using a different title company," Paul explained. "One in a neighboring county that might not have received proper notice of the injunction. We need to act fast." George immediately filed for an emergency hearing, while Detective Wilson worked to identify the supposed buyer. What we discovered sent shockwaves through our already strained nerves. "The buyer is listed as Desert Vista Holdings, LLC," Paul reported. "It's registered in Arizona to a James Blackwood." "Blackwood?" Frank repeated. "As in Janet's husband," Paul confirmed grimly. "Or at least, someone with the same last name as her previous identity. Too much of a coincidence to ignore." The picture suddenly became clear. Janet hadn't been working alone. This was an elaborate con involving at least one partner, someone who was potentially her actual husband, making her marriage to Frank bigamous and fraudulent. "They've done this before," I realized aloud. "They target victims together. She marries into the family, builds trust, then executes the financial exploitation. He stays in the background until it's time to convert the assets." "Which means the closing on the house sale is where they plan to reunite," George suggested. "She delivers the property, he provides the cash, and they disappear together." "Then that's where we'll catch them," Detective Wilson declared. "The closing is scheduled for Tuesday at Western States Title Company. We'll be waiting." As we prepared for this final confrontation, I felt a strange calm settle over me. After months of being victimized, manipulated, and nearly destroyed, I was finally taking control back. Janet had stolen my home, my savings, and nearly my relationship with my children, but she had underestimated my resilience and the power of unexpected allies who had come to my aid when I needed them most. Tuesday couldn't come quickly enough. The morning of the closing dawned clear and bright, belying the tension we all felt. Detective Wilson had coordinated with local police to position officers strategically around Western States Title Company. George, Abigail, and I waited in a car across the street, watching as employees arrived and opened the office. Janet's vehicle just pulled into the lot. Paul's voice came through the phone. "Gray Lexus, as expected." "She's alone." "Any sign of the buyer?" George asked. "Not yet. We have all entrances covered." Frank, who had insisted on being part of this operation despite our concerns for his safety, was positioned inside the building. He had arrived early, claiming to be awaiting another appointment, giving him a vantage point in the lobby. "She's getting out of the car," Frank reported via text message. "Designer suit, carrying a portfolio, looks confident." We watched as Janet strode into the building, showing no signs of being a woman on the run or under investigation. Her practiced poise was evident even from a distance. The buyer's representative just arrived. Paul updated us 20 minutes later. Male, approximately 50 years old, well-dressed. Matches the driver's license photo we have for James Blackwood. My heart raced. This was it, the culmination of Janet's elaborate scheme, and our one chance to catch both conspirators together. Following our agreed plan, we waited until all parties had entered the conference room and the closing was underway. Then, Paul gave the signal. Officers moved into position while our small group entered the building. Frank texted from inside. "They're signing papers now." Janet looks nervous, keeps checking her watch. Paul led the way to the conference room, with George, Abigail, and me following. The receptionist tried to stop us, but Paul flashed his badge. "Police business," he stated firmly. We entered the conference room to find Janet seated beside a well-groomed man in an expensive suit, both signing documents. The title company representative looked up in confusion. "What's the meaning of this interruption?" she demanded. "We're in the middle of a closing." Janet's head snapped up, her expression shifting from shock to calculated control in an instant. "Detective Wilson," she said smoothly, "this is a private business transaction. I'm not sure why you're here." "Janet Williams," Paul replied formally. "Or should I say, Janet Blackwood. We're here because this transaction violates a court injunction preventing the sale of this property." The title representative looked alarmed. "Injunction? There's nothing in our title search about an injunction." "Because Miss Williams deliberately chose a title company in a different jurisdiction than where the injunction was filed," George explained. "A calculated attempt to circumvent a legal court order." Janet maintained her composure. "These are serious accusations. My attorney will address them appropriately. In the meantime, we're in the middle of a legal transaction." "There's nothing legal about this transaction," I interjected, stepping forward. "You stole my home through fraud, emptied my bank accounts, and now you're attempting to sell property you don't rightfully own." The man beside Janet spoke for the first time. "I'm simply a buyer. I have no knowledge of any disputes regarding this property." "Is that so, Mr. Blackwood?" Detective Wilson asked pointedly. "Or should I say, husband of Janet Blackwood? We have documentation of your marriage in Arizona." "The same Janet who is supposedly married to this gentleman's son." He gestured toward Frank, who had moved to stand beside me. Janet's careful mask began to crack. "This is absurd. I've never seen this man before today." "Really?" Paul countered, placing a folder on the table. "Then perhaps you can explain these joint bank accounts in Arizona? Or these property records showing you've purchased and sold 3 homes together in the past 5 years? Or these photographs of your wedding in Sedona 8 years ago?" The title representative stood up. "I'm suspending this closing immediately pending resolution of these issues." "You can't do that," Janet snapped, her cultivated poise evaporating. "The paperwork is almost complete. We have a valid deed." "A deed obtained through fraud," George countered, "from a man who was heavily medicated in a hospital bed. A deed for property that wasn't even fully his to transfer, due to incomplete survivorship documentation after his wife's death." Janet's eyes darted between faces, calculating her options. Blackwood began slowly gathering his documents. "I believe I should consult with my attorney before proceeding." "Actually, sir, you'll need to stay right here," Detective Wilson informed him. "We have questions about your involvement in what appears to be an ongoing pattern of elder financial exploitation across multiple states." Janet suddenly stood, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. "This is harassment. I'm leaving." "I'm afraid not, Miss Williams, or Blackwood," Paul replied calmly. "We have a warrant for your arrest on charges of elder abuse, fraud, financial exploitation, and theft." 2 uniformed officers entered the room. Janet's eyes narrowed as she realized she was trapped. Then, in a desperate move, she grabbed her portfolio and flung it at Detective Wilson, creating momentary chaos as papers scattered everywhere. She bolted for the door, shoving the title representative aside. I found myself directly in her path. Our eyes met for a split second, hers filled with cold calculation, mine with the determination of a man who had finally found his strength. "You ruined everything," she hissed as she tried to push past me. Without thinking, I braced myself, refusing to move. Janet collided with me, the impact sending her off balance. As she stumbled, Frank moved quickly to block her escape route. "It's over, Janet," he said quietly. Her face contorted with rage. "You weak, pathetic fool," she spat at Frank. "I never loved you. You were just a means to an end." "I know that now," Frank replied, his voice steady despite the pain in his eyes. Officer Cameron stepped forward, handcuffs ready. "Janet Williams, you're under arrest for elder abuse, fraud, theft, and violation of a court order." As the officer recited her rights, Janet's calculated mask completely shattered. "He signed those papers willingly," she shouted, gesturing wildly at me. "He's just a confused old man who can't remember what he agreed to." "Is that your official statement?" Detective Wilson asked calmly, nodding to another officer who was recording the encounter. "That Mr. Reynolds signed the papers knowingly? Not that they were health insurance forms as you claimed at the hospital." Janet's eyes widened as she realized her mistake. She had just contradicted her own story about my supposed confusion. "I want my lawyer," she stated flatly as the handcuffs clicked into place. Meanwhile, Blackwood had made his own attempt to leave, only to find his path blocked by 2 officers. "I'm just a buyer," he protested weakly. "I had no idea about any fraud." "The joint bank accounts and history of similar transactions suggest otherwise," Mr. Blackwood, Detective Wilson replied. You're being detained for questioning regarding conspiracy to commit fraud and financial exploitation. As both Janet and Blackwood were led away, the title representative looked shell-shocked. In 15 years, I've never seen anything like this. Consider yourself lucky, George advised her, and perhaps implement better procedures for checking injunctions across jurisdictions. Outside in the parking lot, I watched as Janet was placed in a police cruiser. Our eyes met through the window, hers filled with hatred, mine with something approaching pity. Despite everything she had done, I couldn't help but wonder what had shaped a person capable of such calculated cruelty. Frank stood beside me, his shoulders slumped. I can't believe I fell for everything she said, that I almost helped her steal your home and your dignity. I placed a hand on his shoulder. She's manipulated people for years, son. You're not the first to be deceived, and you won't be the last. But I should have trusted you. Should have questioned her when things didn't add up. What matters is that you did eventually, I assured him. When it counted most. As we drove away from the title company, I felt an enormous weight lifting. Janet was in custody. The sale had been stopped. The evidence against her was substantial and growing. But many challenges remained. My finances were still decimated, the house legally remained in her name, and the road to recovery would be long. Yet for the first time since waking in that hospital bed months ago, I felt something I had nearly lost forever. Hope. 6 months passed, like a whirlwind of legal proceedings, paperwork, and gradual healing. The morning sun streamed through the kitchen windows of my home, my rightfully reclaimed home, as I prepared coffee for George, who was arriving to deliver final updates on the case. The doorbell rang precisely at 9. George's punctuality had been a constant throughout this ordeal, one of many anchors I had clung to during the storm. "Good morning, Columbus," he greeted me warmly. "Beautiful day, isn't it?" "Every day I wake up in my own home is beautiful," I replied, handing him a mug of coffee. We settled in the living room, where the familiar surroundings still gave me a sense of grateful disbelief. The journey back to this moment had been arduous, but ultimately triumphant. "So, the final disposition," George began, opening his briefcase. "Janet has accepted a plea deal on the criminal charges, 20 years with possibility of parole after 12. The prosecutor was particularly motivated after discovering 7 other victims across 3 states. And Blackwood? 15 years. He rolled over on Janet fairly quickly, providing evidence of their entire operation in exchange for a reduced sentence. Turns out they've been running variations of this scam for nearly a decade." I shook my head. All those lives disrupted, savings stolen, trust betrayed. The good news is that with their testimony and financial records, the authorities have been able to recover assets for many victims, including you. The Nevada accounts have been frozen, and the courts have authorized distribution of recovered funds. "How much?" I asked, trying not to get my hopes up. "Approximately 60% of what was taken from your accounts," George replied. "Not everything, unfortunately. They had already spent or hidden some of it too well. But enough for you to be financially stable again." This was better than I had expected. Combined with the court's decision 3 months ago to void the fraudulent deed transfer and restore my home ownership, my life was finally returning to solid ground. "And the civil judgment?" George smiled. "That's actually the best news. The court has awarded you punitive damages of $300,000. Between that and the recovered funds, you're in good shape financially." I let out a long breath, feeling tension I hadn't even realized I was still carrying. Finally release. "It's really over then." "Legally, yes. The emotional recovery takes longer, I suspect." He was right about that. Though Janet and her accomplice were behind bars, the trauma of their betrayal lingered. I still checked my locks twice each night. Still scrutinized bank statements with paranoid attention. Still woke sometimes from nightmares of homelessness and abandonment. "How's Frank doing?" George asked, changing the subject. "Better, I think. The divorce was finalized last month. Since the marriage was legally fraudulent due to Janet's bigamy, it was fairly straightforward. He's in therapy, working through the manipulation and betrayal. We have dinner together every Sunday now. And Megan? She's coming to visit next week. Our relationship is improving. The distance helps in some ways. We're taking it slow." George nodded approvingly. "Family healing takes time. The important thing is you're all trying." After George left, I walked through the house that had so nearly been stolen from me. Each room held memories. Elaine and I bringing baby Frank home, Megan learning to walk in the hallway, family holidays around the dining table. Janet had nearly erased all of that history with a few forged signatures. Later that afternoon, I drove to the community center where I now led weekly meetings of a support group for victims of elder fraud. The group had started small, just myself and 2 others Abigail had connected me with. Now we regularly had 15 to 20 attendees, sharing stories, strategies, and healing. Abigail was waiting in the meeting room when I arrived. Our friendship had deepened over the months, evolving into something neither of us had expected. At 65 and 43 respectively, we had both been initially hesitant about the romantic feelings developing between us. But life had taught me not to waste precious time on hesitation. "Ready for today's session?" she asked, with a smile that still made my heart skip. "Always. Today I want to focus on rebuilding trust in others and in ourselves." "Perfect topic," she agreed. "That's where most people struggle the most." As group members began arriving, I was struck by the transformation I'd witnessed in so many of them. People who had first come in broken, humiliated, and defeated now walked taller, spoke with confidence, and helped newcomers navigate their own healing journeys. After the meeting, Paul Wilson stopped by with news. "The district attorney's office is creating a specialized elder fraud unit," he announced proudly. "Your case was the catalyst. They've asked me to help train the new team." "That's wonderful," I replied. "Systemic change is exactly what's needed. They've also requested your involvement as a consultant, if you're interested. Your experience and perspective would be invaluable." The offer took me by surprise. "Me? I'm not a law enforcement professional or an attorney." "No, you're something equally important, a survivor who turned personal tragedy into community advocacy. Think about it." I promised I would, feeling a sense of purpose that had been growing steadily over these months of recovery. "No, you're something equally important, a survivor who turned personal tragedy into community advocacy. Think about it." "I realized during all this that I've been running away for years," he admitted. "First from the grief of losing Mom, then from a marriage that never felt quite right. I'm ready to stay in one place, rebuild connections." "I'm proud of you," I told him sincerely. "That kind of self-awareness doesn't come easily." "I learned it from watching you this past year," Frank replied. "You lost nearly everything, Dad, yet you never became bitter or gave up. Instead, you built something meaningful from the wreckage." His words touched me deeply. From the depths of betrayal and loss had come unexpected gifts: reconciliation with my children, new purpose through advocacy, even new love with Abigail. The following weekend, I hosted a neighborhood gathering, something I hadn't done since Elaine passed. The backyard filled with a mix of longtime friends who had stood by me, new friends made through the support group, and family. Megan had arrived from Oregon, cautiously reintegrating herself into our lives. Frank manned the grill, looking more relaxed than he had in years. Abigail joined me on the patio, watching the scene with appreciation. "Look at what you've created," she said softly. "A community built on authenticity rather than manipulation." "I couldn't have done it alone," I acknowledged. "When Janet isolated me from everyone I knew, I thought I was finished. Finding unexpected allies like you and your brothers showed me that connection can come from the most surprising places." As evening approached, I gathered everyone's attention for a toast. Looking around at the faces of those who had helped me reclaim not just my home but my life, I felt profound gratitude. A year ago, I experienced how quickly everything we take for granted can be stolen, not just material possessions but dignity, family connections, even identity. I learned that predators exist who target vulnerability with calculated precision. But I also discovered something far more powerful: the human capacity for resilience and community. I raised my glass higher, to second chances and unexpected blessings, to justice that, while imperfect, still matters, and most importantly, to the connections that sustain us through our darkest moments. As glasses clinked and conversation resumed, I reflected on the journey that had brought me here. Janet had nearly destroyed me with her elaborate con, but in the process, she had inadvertently helped me build something far richer than what I had before, a life defined not by possessions but by purpose. Not by naivete would be wisdom hard-earned. The house around us was indeed worth $1.1 million on paper, but the true value of what I'd fought to reclaim and rebuild was immeasurable. Later that night, after guests had departed and I was alone with my thoughts, I pondered the lesson that would stay with me forever. Our greatest vulnerability lies not in trusting others, but in forgetting our own strength. Janet had counted on my isolation, my confusion, my despair. She never anticipated that from those very ashes, I would rise with newfound purpose and determination. The home I now occupied wasn't just a structure of wood and stone, but a testament to resilience, a physical reminder that what others take from us, we can reclaim with courage, community, and perseverance. Have you ever faced a situation where your trust was betrayed? How did you find the strength to rebuild? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. And if this journey resonated with you, please consider liking this video, subscribing to the channel, and sharing with others who might benefit from this message of hope and resilience. Thank you for listening to my story. Remember, it's never too late to reclaim what rightfully belongs to you, whether that's property, dignity, or peace of mind.